Well, I have to say, it is good to see someone this morning. Not that it's not good to see the rest of you. You guys are all awesome and fantastic. But we've been missing someone from our midst for a few weeks now. And Barb, it's fantastic to have you. Barb's been a little under the weather, so it's good to have your smiling face, I have to say. I have absolutely loved our latest car that we've had, the RAV4 that has been driving us back and forth everywhere the last 3 or 4 years. Has been my absolute most favorite vehicle we have ever driven. Some people I know, they're like, man, it's a car. It gets me to where I have to go, and that's all I need it for. But this car, it has everything about it that makes it just perfect to me. The size of it is great. It's not a gas guzzling, huge thing that makes my wallet whimper when we drive by the Esso, but it's actually comparable in mileage to a sedan. But it's actually just a perfect size for me. I like being up a little bit on the road. I got a good view of everything. Plus, when I get in and out of the thing, I'm not falling to the ground and need a forklift to get me back out. I just slide in and I slide out. It's great for an old guy like me. There's the right amount of technology in it. I mean, there can always be more technology. I would enjoy an AI voice speaking to me and a built-in display in the window and the windshield, with sensor information and all that. Ejector seats when Francine is talking too much, stuff like that. But what we have is great. We got the heated seats and the heated mirrors. Even the wipers have a wire in them that heats up when it's icy so they don't freeze up and get all, like that. I love my Android Auto. I just tell it where I want to go and it brings up the map or what song I want to play, and Michael Bublé croons for me. But we are in the last few months of a 4-year lease, and even though we haven't had to do anything to it yet, I do have an appointment this coming week to have the brakes worked on. Those things do eventually wear out, and admittingly so, I can be a little hard on the brakes, but it's not my fault. The people in front of me just drive too slowly. I think pastors should get special lights, like ambulances and cops, so that we don't have to stop at red lights and stuff like that. Just bypass all the slow stuff. But my brakes, they started making some pretty funny sounds recently, the grinding and the squeaking. So I called Toyota, made an appointment, because brakes are one of those important things that you need to have working for you. When you tap that pedal, you want the car to stop. If a kid, jarts out onto the road, chasing their ball, or a puppy dog runs out from behind a car, or some dude wearing a Boston Bruins jersey, even though you feel like hitting the gas, legally, you have to stop, right? So you need those things working properly. And currently, mine sound as abrasive as an Archie Bunker rant. Kids, if you don't know who that is, ask your parents. I'm not looking forward to the bill because it really needs the whole 9 yards. Pads, rotors, the whole enchilada, you name it. But because having good brakes is really important, I'm just going to bite that bullet and get it done. But before we trade it in later this year, I'm going to be using those things really well to get my money's worth. So if you come with me for a drive, you better wear your seatbelt, just saying, all right? We learn about something that was really important to Jesus today in our text as we move along in John chapter 19. At this point, he has been arrested and questioned by the religious authorities. And then he was dragged to the Roman governor and be handed over to be executed. Pontius Pilate, he repeatedly declares that he found nothing guilty about this Jesus, but still he has him beaten, has him flogged and all messed up, hoping that this harsh treatment would fulfill the people's bloodlust. But no, they still wanted him dead. Pilate tries to dissuade them over and over again, but the religious leaders, they pull out the politics card and they tell him that they would go and spread word to Caesar that Pilate was against him. And so he felt this pressure to keep his job and his power, possibly his own life. And he sentenced Jesus to be crucified. We learn some things during what happens next, and this is where we pick up in John chapter 19, verses 17 and on. Carrying the cross by himself, he, Jesus, went to the place called Place of the Skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. There they nailed him to the cross. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side, with Jesus in between them. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so that many people could read it. So here, John gives no reference that other gospel writers do include in this whole journey that Jesus had. Walking and carrying the wooden beam really to his own funeral. Whereas some of the other guys speak of the road that he took, of all the people who were lined up on either side watching this event. Some of them horrified, others yelling at Jesus, telling Jesus, that he was an awful person. The other guys tell of Jesus stumbling along the way, that the weight of the beam taxing his weakened and bloody, beaten shell of a body. And so eventually the soldiers tell a man named Simon to go and carry that cross for Jesus. That man is actually the one that we named our son after, hoping that he too would one day learn to carry his cross. It was either Simon or Spock, and we decided that was the right choice. But John here tells us that Jesus carried his cross, which he did. And he further focuses on the fact that Jesus went to this place where they crucified many, many people. A hill likely shaped like a skull where it got its name, which was some cruel irony, I think. And there he was nailed to that cross alongside of 2 other criminals. Now, depending on your background, depending on what church you grew up in, the stories that you were told there, even the pictures that you saw in Sunday school class, up on that old flannel graph board. Many people imagine Jesus on this large and tall cross, hung there way up high for the crowds to look and gaze upon. Many church buildings have crosses, this imagery where our faith is based out of. And I get that, but it's interesting. So many of those crosses are sanitized, aren't they? The wood is sanded down, it's varnished or painted, it's smooth to the touch. Some of them even have little lights behind them to make them look even prettier for us. But can you imagine hanging an electric chair up on your wall and hanging lights around it to make it pretty? Again, I understand the imagery, but the cross that Jesus was nailed to, it wasn't soft and smooth and sanitized. It was, as the song that many of you know puts it, old and rugged. Those beams of wood had been used over and over again. Criminal after criminal had been nailed to them. They were recycled time after time. And these crosses, they weren't these massive, tall structures that pointed way up high. Remember, this region was one where wood was a scarce commodity. They didn't have giant oak trees growing in everybody's backyard. There were no 50-year-old maple trees waiting to be cut down and turned into lumber. So when they crucified someone, they didn't just get out their cell phones and place an order with Kent Building Supplies to have some beams delivered. The guys get out the nail guns and slap together a few more crosses for the week. They just used the same ones they had been using for ages. And because of the lack of wood, those beams, they weren't large, just big enough to go together and hold a human body. Sometimes in the traditional cross shape, as we tend to think. Other times it was more of an X, like on Family Feud. But because of the smaller amount of wood in these crosses, they were not these giant, huge structures that rose way up out of the ground. The person being crucified was right at ground level for everyone to see, to be able to look them directly in the eye. So this is the image that you can place in your mind. Jesus nailed to a cross, not a clean and shiny one, but an old, rough one, stained with the blood of 100 other criminals of years past. And like they did with most of them, Pilate put up a sign over Jesus that told the people who he was. This was usually done to let the crowds know the person's identity. So word would get out in case people didn't know who they were, their families could know, and to generate fear so the empire would be respected. But for Jesus, he instructed them to write not just his name, but also this title, the King of the Jews, written in 3 languages. Latin for those in the Roman Empire to read, in Hebrew for the Jewish people, and in Greek, which was just the common language for the bulk of the rest of the crowd to see. Now this was a strange addition, but if you recall from last week, Pilate seemed to know that there was something special about Jesus. He was actually frightened by his presence and by what he claimed to be the Son of God. And in this last act, before Pilate simply disappears as simply a footnote in the history of the world, he seems to want everyone to know who this man is. Look at the next couple of verses. Then the leading priests objected and said to Pilate, change it from the King of the Jews to he said, I am the King of the Jews. Big difference. But Pilate replied, no, what I have written, I have written. The religious leaders, they protest. Change it, they object. Just say that's what he claimed to be. But Pilate just leaves it. That's what I have declared. And in doing so, I think we gain a touch of insight into the fact that Pilate saw Jesus as something much more than just a rebel or a troublemaker. Something more. Well, the soldiers nail Jesus and the others to their crosses. Then they go about waiting for the criminals to perish. It took time for them to die, to suffocate. Barely able to breathe, being squished down like that. They had to pull themselves up, having to gasp to get some air in their lungs, tearing the flesh and their muscles where the nails held them up. During this time, we're told that the soldiers played their equivalent of poker. They threw some dice to see who won the different parts of Jesus' clothing. There's no sense letting a perfectly good tunic go to waste to them. But as Jesus hung there, holding on to what little life was left in his broken body, he looked at a couple of people in front of him, and he made a request. Standing near the cross were Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. Mary apparently was a very common name, as was John. Jesus was actually pretty popular back then. Jesus wasn't the only Jesus. Yeshua in Hebrew, or as we'd say in English, Joshua. Often children were named after a family member, many times the firstborn son named after his dad. It's so interesting here that John names these people as being there at the foot of the cross. And of all the followers that Jesus had gathered during his ministry on earth, and of all the people he had helped and healed and touched their lives, just a handful of them are named here. These women, which, by the way, if you're trying to get your story out in this time and in this culture, naming women in your document did not go to help your authenticity, all right? Women simply were not seen as equals. They were more like property. And yet, so interesting, when Jesus rises from the dead a little later on, who is there? Do you remember? The ladies. And when he's crucified, the ones mentioned are them. Because that's who was there. Specifically, Mary, Jesus' mother. That young teenage girl who once said yes to God and pondered this incredible journey she was going to be taken on. In our culture today, just a child is all she was. Yet she knew from the beginning that one day a sword would pierce her heart and it would be broken. Well, she's an old lady now. Joseph, likely already dead, her husband. Scholars believe him to be older than Mary when they got married. And in their time, health care, it wasn't what it is now. I saw someone recently in the obituaries that my in-laws knew that had died, so I let them know. And they were like, oh, how old was he? They asked me, and I'm like, 83. They said, oh, how did he die? I was like, he was 83. And they're like, yeah, but did he have cancer? Did he have a heart attack? No, he was so young. See, as we get older, age becomes relative, right? I used to think 50 was ancient, right? Not anymore, but you know, when you're in your 70s, 80 just doesn't seem that old anymore. But in this time, people didn't live to be 80 or 70. In fact, 50 was considered old. Remember, there were no antibiotics. Medicine was pretty sketchy, pretty rough. So an infection, a fever, could kill a person. And so Mary, just a teenager when Jesus was born, 33 years later, was in her late 40s by now. An older woman. No offense, ladies, all right? She probably even had some gray hair and a few wrinkles. But when Jesus looked out at her, he said to the only disciple who stood there with him, John, and he asked him to look after his mother. Remember, Joseph, likely gone. No social assistant programs by the government. Women did not work outside of the home. And so Jesus, as the oldest son, was tasked with looking after her. Now some ask, well, why didn't his other younger siblings take on this charge, look after her? We're not told. Well, why weren't they doing this? All we do know is that none of them were there. None of them. The only friend who stood by his side to the end was John. And so he looked at him and asked of his friend, John, take care of her. And I think this teaches us so much about what Jesus thought was important. It's interesting how in our culture today, age is no longer seen as a good thing. We see it as weakness. The body is failing, and so we deny it. We cover it up as best as we can. Aging is shunned and feared, and when it does happen, we tend to push it away for someone else to have to deal with and look after. And we rationalize, well, we don't have the ability, the medical knowledge to take care of our parents or our grandparents, when sadly and honestly, it's more like we don't have the time, or we won't make the time. So interesting, Lucas said that where he's from, over in Vietnam, in their culture, you won't find any nursing homes. They don't have any. None. Because families just look after each other. That's the norm. Parents, they have kids, they look after their kids, and then when the kids grow up and the parents get older, the kids look after them. Grandparents often still live in the homes too. There's no excuses, just respect and care for family as they get older, because age is looked up to. The experience, the wisdom. Here we dye our hair and get Botox injections, and at first sign of any issues, we cram our old folks into nursing homes and we shake the dust off our hands, I know sometimes it's necessary. They've got medical problems. We were looking into a spot for my mom, to look after her. They might need 24-hour care, and you just have to work to keep the lights on. That's what a lot of people have to do. But there's a problem, isn't there, in our thinking when it comes to age and respect and the care of our older people. The Bible, as you read it, teaches repeatedly about the importance of caring for and respecting our older folks, about the advantage of having them to learn from. There's a reason why leaders in God's church aren't called managers or CEOs. You know what they're called? Elders. Because God knows that with age comes wisdom. Not always, but often. And one of the last things that Jesus thought of, one of his last words on earth before he died, was about this. As he was about to give up his last breath, as he was about to perform the most important act in the history of the world, the sacrificial death that would open the doors up to the kingdom of heaven, that would wipe out our sin and bring hope and forgiveness to all repentant believers. As Jesus prepared for this monumental moment, he drew in a painful breath, and he looked at his friend that he trusted and asked him to take care of his mom. See, what Jesus did on the cross is the most important event in all of human history. And I hope that you know what he did for you, and that you have decided to follow him and receive that gift. And if you haven't yet, that you would do it, so that you could know peace, know hope, know the love that God has for you. But today, I hope you also know how important it was to Jesus to have his mom cared for. And if you still have your parents and your grandparents, you are a lucky person. So love them. Take care of them. Bless them with everything you have. Learn from them. Listen to their stories, their advice. Soak in their experience. The same goes for every older person in your life. And when that time comes, when they need your help, remember how blessed you have been to have them, and do everything you have in your power to take care of them. Father, an amazing small detail, almost hidden in the depths and the power of the message of the cross. Jesus about to perform the most incredible act that changed history, that changed the world forever. Taking on the weight of sin, taking on the punishment that all of us sinners deserved upon his perfect body, and dying so that those sins could be forgiven. And yet, in the midst of all that, looking out and seeing his mom, who gave birth to him, who wiped his skinned knee when he fell down, made sure he had enough food in his belly growing up, and who showed him from a mother's heart what love was. Seeing her alone and making sure that she was looked after. I just pray that we would learn from this incredible example of Jesus in his time of need, still reaching out with an open heart, caring for this person who gave so much to him. And I pray that we would look at every older person in our life, our parents, our grandparents, everyone with gray hair and wrinkles who have earned them by being around and just experiencing life and gaining wisdom through it. And that we would every day appreciate to having them in our lives. That we would reach out and help in any way that we can, be respectful, and we would just learn as a culture, Father, just how important it is to have those people in our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And staying together. The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, and all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide. Trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all being here today. It's been awesome to be able to worship our God with you. And this week would be, you'd have lots of opportunities to share His love with everyone that you meet. And let's go out into the world and just appreciate the people in our lives and older folks in our lives that we have and learn a little bit from them. God bless them. See you all next week.